Hi everyone, welcome to part 2 in our 4-part series. My name is Rukmini and I am a community outreach liaison for Raksha Inc. Raksha is a Georgia-based nonprofit working for healing, empowerment, and justice for South Asian survivors of violence. This April, for National Sexual Assault Awareness Month, we are featuring the voices of folks involved with a South Asian collegiate dance network, talking about sexual assault in the community, what we can do to support survivors, and what we can do to eradicate the issue. So for part 2, I'm joined by Tejas and Rishab. Thank you both for being here with me today. Could y'all go ahead and introduce yourselves and talk about your positions in regards to addressing sexual assault within the dance network?
Hi, my name is Tejas and I'm a captain for GT Kurbani.
My name is Jain. I'm one of the managers for GT Kurbani.
And just like as an introduction, our executive board for GT Kurbani has been putting in a lot of work this year, it being like a down year. So we really wanted to prioritize sexual violence prevention in our community, because we had noticed that in the past it had not really been prioritized that much. The topic had been around. Obviously, some people are educated on it, but not enough. And so what we realized once we became members of the executive board, we realized that incidences of sexual violence would occur in our community, and they would linger around for a couple of weeks, and then the topic would just die off, and no actionable steps to really prevent that same thing from happening again would ever come up. And we realized that like something really needed to be done. I think we came to the conclusion that competition boards and national competitions, and I think they're doing the most that they can, but what it really comes down to is the individual, and it comes down to the individual teams to really make the culture change, to really be able to see a wide range in our community.
And one point I kind of wanted to add is, when we started this, we kind of started our initiative back in, I want to say maybe July of 2020. And, we as members of an all-male dance team, are already kind of endowed with some privilege, being South Asian males and kind of having that advantage per se. But one of the things that we wanted to start with was just learning and kind of understanding our place in this conversation. And just to kind of shout out, I know we had reached out to a lot of different organizations just as we were drafting statements and like getting our platform together. And Raksha as an organization just helped us a lot in, when we were making a video about sexual violence prevention or creating a policy for our team or figuring out how to talk to other teams. The wonderful people at Raksha all helped us out in, editing things to make sure that we had proper wording or making sure that we addressed policies with actionable items and things like that. So we just wanted to start off with like a thank you, obviously, to all of you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all. I'm really interested in what you said about having to first start with learning where you fit into the conversation. What did that look like and what did you learn?
Yeah. So I think one of the first things we did when, there were a couple instances of sexual violence cases that had occurred in the South Asian Dance Network, I think around that time, around July of 2020. And one of the first things our team executive board did when we met was we had to understand, how did this happen within the South Asian Dance Network, but also how do we want to make sure that nothing like that would happen again, be it with members of our team or with members of other teams in the circuit. And so, a lot of our work started with, understanding the prevalence of sexual violence in the circuit, and also, how we could take the little steps to make sure it didn't happen to us, or that no one on our team ended up being a perpetrator. And so, we did a lot of reading through, obviously national resources, thanks to RAIN, and also resources here at Georgia Tech. So there's an organization called Voice, and they're pretty closely linked to the Title IX office here at Tech. And, they also helped us out a lot, providing resources and saying, particularly for student organizations, there are some codes of conduct that are important to follow, or, here's parts of the Georgia Tech student code of conduct that entail sexual violence or sexual assault. And so a lot of that, reading and understanding was one of the first critical steps. And then, from that, our executive board, when we made a short kind of informational video that we posted on our team's Instagram, we talked about how, we as an all-male team cannot just absolve ourselves of this. We have to understand that, in a lot of instances, males end up being perpetrators of sexual violence. In some cases, even unintentionally, they end up being on the wrong end of it. But we want to make sure that, members of our team understand that we have to hold each other accountable just as much as we may try to hold other people accountable. And that was one of the first things we did, was we wrote an open letter to the members of our team, and we said, in the past, and I can't necessarily speak for actions of previous executive boards of our team, but in the past, behavior had been lax, or enforcement had been lax on misogynistic language, or actions that could be perceived in the wrong light. So what we had told our team was, this is the new standard we're going by. Our executive board will hold our team accountable. Our team will hold each other accountable, and we have this system essentially where everyone keeps an eye out for each other and an eye out for themselves. And if you see something or do something that looks wrong, someone will call you out for it, or you will call someone else out for it. And so kind of changing that mindset in the beginning of, oh, we're not going to turn a blind eye to this. That was one of the biggest shifts we had to make. And from there, our team has been very receptive. And as we've spoken to other teams, they've also been understanding of, okay, how do we cause this sort of culture change in teams across the country?
So like Rishab said, we first really aim to educate our team, educate ourselves. And so we reached out to these different organizations, Voice and Raksha, to really educate ourselves. I know another really kind of casual thing that we did, which was actually pretty effective, was just speaking to our peers and just talking about the topic very casually about it. I know I think one of the most effective things that we did was when we talked to our peers, we were like, just tell us bluntly what our team does or has done in the past that is wrong and that should be, changed, or what do men in general do in society or in the community that need to be changed. And I think opening up the floor to that sort of conversation, I think people are very open, and I think us kind of saying that we're open to hearing it really lets us hear the truth, people's actual genuine truths behind that question. And that actually was very effective, and we kind of went with that pattern whenever we talked to other teams as well. We were just say bluntly, what do men do in general, or what has Kurbani done in general in the past or now that needs to be changed? And I think we got a lot of really good answers that has actually been very effective in helping us educate our team and also pass on these ideas to other people, other all-male teams, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's really cool that y'all had that opportunity to have those conversations. When you did feedback sessions like that, could you summarize like a couple of things that you learned that really, were a catalyst for a big shift for you?
There are a lot of instances where people who commit these acts don't really know that they're doing it. They think that it's normalized. They think that it's normal. Let's take for an example, you see a girl across the dance floor and she makes eye contact with you. So that's my signal to go dance with her without even asking her if she wants to dance. People don't know that that might not be the right thing to do because they just think it's so normalized, and so I think as we had these conversations, we began to realize more and more that these things that we didn't see as acts of sexual violence, whether they might be, minor acts of sexual violence, are still like big no-nos that we need to consider.
Yeah, and to Tejas's point, not only do actions of sexual violence exist on that spectrum, right, of like, touching or groping all the way up to like sexual assault and rape, but what we had also found when we, conversed with our peers or other team executive boards in the circuit was, it's just as much through speech as it is through action. And like, and the solution to this is not necessarily to like berate somebody. It's just to say, hey man, like that's not cool. Like you shouldn't say that. Understand that they put in the work too. And that I think was one of the toughest things to, at the very beginning, at the outset of all this, was one of the toughest things to identify both within our own team and within other teams, and also to just like have the courage to kind of stand up and say like, hey, that's not right. Because if it's so steeped in a culture that like, oh yes, it's okay to say these things, being the one person who's like, no, it's not okay, here's why, it in the beginning, it sort of makes you look like the villain, right? Like, oh, why is he not letting us say what we want to say? It sort of takes an evolution for people to come to the fact that, oh yes, these are things I shouldn't say, here's why. here is a better thing to say, or here is something that will allow me to express my viewpoint without being inherently misogynistic or sexist.
Yeah, yeah. I want to talk to you a little bit about like the culture that you just mentioned, Rishab. Like, what do you think are some factors that like allow folks to perpetrate sexual violence within the dance network?
Yeah, this is one of the kind of $1,000,000 questions that we've not only asked ourselves, but also, in the 20, 30 plus calls that we've had with team executive boards or competition boards. This is a question we've always kind of asked because we want to get just a kind of, a temperature reading on what people think. And what we've almost always found is that like culturally, like South Asian Americans who are involved in like collegiate dance networks, are bound to like the American college culture and also just like the South Asian like immigrant parents culture usually. And so, like you obviously get the best of both worlds when it comes to that culturally, but you also kind of get, the spots that don't necessarily line up well, or the spots that, are rooted in some sort of discrimination or things like that. And so I think when it comes to like the South Asian aspect, what I know, and my parents were very good about, keeping this sort of aspect away from our lives. But what I've heard from a lot of other, South Asian like students or members of large South Asian families is that, men and women are treated somewhat differently. And this is something that has culturally been rooted in kind of years of oppression and discrimination. But we have seen that like sons are treated differently than daughters, or husbands treat their wives in a certain way. And as a child, when you try to question that, it's like, oh yes, that's how it is. Like Dada is allowed to treat Dadi this way because of this, or something like that. And being the generation to kind of try to break that is very difficult because you're up against generations and generations of, oh, that's how it's always been. And so, part of that is still somewhat ingrained in what parents and grandparents bring to their children. And so I think that's one big aspect is, oh yes, like men are put on this different pedestal than women are, and that's what the culture has been. And I think we're seeing that change, but obviously it doesn't happen overnight. And so it takes a sort of generational shift, which I think is happening with our generation. And then coupled with that is the sort of like American college culture and that portrayal, in that, you have, high rates of sexual assault or sexual violence on college campuses. And, coupled with, the consumption of alcohol or drug use, all of that together sort of creates this, massive issue of, okay, people think they can do what they want to do with a woman or with a man because of what they've seen in the media or because of what they've heard college is like or things like that. And so I think those two together, like they just mentioned, like the over-sexualization of after parties, right? That's often coupled with drug or alcohol use, and it's a bunch of college students who are all South Asian. It's kind of a big mishmash of all of those cultural issues in one. And so I think when we look at the cultural factors, it's obviously a combination of all these things. And it's something that we as young South Asian men in college have to be consistently aware of when we say something or when we do something, that we have to be the ones as a part of that generational shift.
And to add on to that, I definitely think the South Asian culture while growing up, watching our role models, possibly being our fathers, being privileged, growing up with that entitlement, we assume that's normal, just like Rishab said. And, there's many other factors, watching Bollywood movies have that, that idea that, consent's like not a thing, everything should be dramatic. There should be a lot of red flags, but that's okay because it's romantic, that sort of thing. If you see that, watch those movies over and over again, that consistent, that'll kind of change like the way you think, I guess, men growing up. But I do also have to say that, we can't only blame it on how we were brought up, because at the same time, we are our own people. One reason why people usually are not, usually don't change from this is because they're consistently, I think in the circuit, there's some dancers that, might be idolized. They might get special treatment, so once they, the actions that they commit might not get as much consequence just because, they're idolized. They have a lot of people defending them. And I think that actually happens a lot in our circuit. And I think that that lets people get away with a lot. Going back to the overly sexualized thing, I think the circuit is definitely overly sexualized, not only after parties, but even after too. There's this thing called DD Confessions. I don't know, I think it might have died out already, but this perpetuated a lot of, drama and just toxicity in the circuit, because people would be talked about a lot in very sexual and like inappropriate ways. And I think this really perpetuated the idea that some people are better than others. And this is where people kind of got egos about how, oh, I'm very sought after in the circuit, I can do whatever I want. And then other people saw those people as role models. Oh, I want to be like that, And I think that continued on, and I think probably still continues on to this day. And I can see like that could be like a huge reason for why, people aren't really held responsible, or it just continues.
So what I'm hearing y'all say, it's like a lot of different types of power structures that are sort of coming together to create a situation where some people have a lot more like respect or power or control than other folks.
Yeah, definitely. I think particularly in the circuit, there's a lot of different ways that power gets broken down. Even just like within a team, you have like your captains, your managers, and like your team members. Or like when you're performing on stage, you have those who are like lead dancers and then their background dancers. And like that combined with, the pretty obvious of like male, female, or like, all male, all female teams or things like that. Those like that kind of conglomeration of power structures tends to lead into, okay, where did this instance of sexual violence happen? Okay, this person may have been a lead, this person was male. And so you kind of pinpoint like these factors sort of led to maybe how this person thought about a certain situation, how another person didn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess that leads me into my next question, which is like, what strategies have you seen that are effective in helping folks like adjust their mindsets around like trying not to perpetrate sexual violence or assault?
One of the most important, and this applied to our own team just as much as it did to others, was just having a conversation saying, what are there instances of sexual violence that you've heard about that could have been prevented? Or, are there certain problem areas, as they just said, like we would ask like with South Asian men or with men in general, or at after parties or mixers. And so, and there are like quite a few strategies that, we had determined of like general things at after parties, right? Like making sure that you have a buddy system. So someone who you enter with, you keep an eye on them or things like that. Or, keeping an eye on one's drinks, or hosting an after party in an open space so someone can't bring someone to a corner and keep them isolated, or prevent kind of egress for them. So, there are a whole host of like, I guess, minor strategies we can consider. But what we found is that these conversations and the policies or actions that would come out from them, that was one of the most useful tools that we had in preventing sexual violence from ever, coming into the equation. There are all these strategies to like mitigate its presence or to avoid, someone getting caught or something like that. But in order to really truly weed it out, these conversations or, bringing up these viewpoints of people was one of the most important things to stop it before it could ever be thought about happening.
Mm-hmm.
And adding on to that, I think another like big strategy, going back to Rishab's first point, was when we talked to all these teams, I think we were a little bit harder on the all guys teams, all male teams, just because overly like statistically, men are more likely to be perpetrators in society and in our community. So I know when we talked to them, we really, the things that we learned from other teams, the questions we asked, what do all guys do in the circuit, or what does Kurbani do that should be changed? We reported that back to the other all guys teams and said, hey, this is a big set of answers that we got. This is the feedback that we got, and you should take it to heart. Because statistically, like I said, like men are more likely to be the perpetrators in our community. And so I think really attacking the source is like the biggest strategy that I think that we've taken. Telling them, I think talking about the specific scenarios in which sexual violence occurs, not only rape or sexual assault as what might be like the stereotypical sexual violence that people think, but the thing about how, the way that you talked about women, the way that you talk to about, people that you're attracted to, the way that the way that you touch someone that you're dancing with, things like that, the way that you approach them, all of that counts. All of that are things that are the majority of sexual violence that occur in our community, not just rape and, you know, things of sexual assault, but these minor incidences that are actually way bigger than you might think. And we also talked a lot about, I know one example that I talk a lot about is the bar culture, how if you buy a girl a drink, she doesn't owe you her body, you know, that sort of thing. And I feel like that's very normalized, you know, I think that's normalized in American culture. A lot of people think, oh, I'm gonna buy her a drink, and then that'll pressure her into wanting to dance with me or wanting to go back to like my apartment with me or something like that. And changing that mindset and really just kind of bringing that up, kind of revealing that that's not how it should be. I think that really changes people's minds or gets people thinking like, oh, I thought this is normal, but it's actually really bad. And that has been like pretty effective as well.
Yeah. I'm wondering, like, you know, when you're having these conversations with folks, have you found that like men are generally like receptive to hearing that? Like, how have those conversations like worked out?
Yeah, I think usually, so I think usually men are really receptive to it. Now, I can't talk about if they're actually acting in the right way after it. I think while talking in the moment, they have been receptive and, you know, have been wanting to keep contact, have been wanting to keep the conversation going around it. But I can't really give a concrete answer until I see some action that changes. So yeah, I'll let you know in a little bit if in this later comp season if anything changes. But I know like one thing that I can guarantee that would actually be an answer is, I know one reason why this culture perpetuates in our community is because of accountability. And you know, team members don't really hold their other team members accountable. I think it's written, and this is why I say I'm not really sure just based on the conversation, because it might be all talk. I know that I've heard of some teams that, you know, still accept people who try out who have a history of sexual violence, you know, maybe in high school or in the past, and kind of just look the other way or like forego that information just because they might be a good dancer. Or maybe someone might be accused of something, but the team really doesn't really do anything, even though they have a policy. Everyone has signed a contract. It really comes down to, you know, your peers or your teammates really acting on an accusation. And I think that really, that usually never happens. And that's why I think it's kind of all talk at the moment. And I think the next step really needs to be how we can actually get actionable change from, rather than just like talk or accepting the fact that, you know, we need to change. How can we actually change, you know?
Yeah. I guess kind of in closing, speaking from a place where like you're a leader in the South Asian Dance Network and now like maybe looking outward toward the broader South Asian community, what do you think is like a message that you want to leave to us? Like, what should we know? How can we help?
I think, you know, what we talked about a little bit before this interview was just that, you know, I kind of hope that us as being the next generation of Indian Americans growing up in America, that we can start to really see these issues in our own culture and begin to change them. Like we talked about earlier, how like the father figure might be very privileged or entitled in the family. I hope to see that, you know, families are a lot more equal in the partnerships that they make, whether it's between man, woman, however it might be. I hope that the next generations of Indian Americans can begin to change that. And we definitely need to. We cannot take a step back and continue this male entitlement in America, because this would just perpetuate the culture further and further than, you know, where are we going backwards, right? So it might be hard, but I think the first step is really admitting that, you know, I could be a problem, you know, and really seeking out feedback from your peers, because the people that surround you, they know who you are, they know how you act. Really wanting to change, I think, is what will be the best for everyone. So like, please like take the steps to look, like be insightful, reflect, and really take the steps to really change, because in the end, like you can educate yourself and you can be a role model to other people as well.
I think one of the kind of quotes that I live my life by, and they just has heard me say this 1.5 million times at practice or at meetings, is if you want to always be right, you must always be willing to change your mind. And so, as they just said, we have grown up and seen through this one lens of South Asian culture where, sometimes men and women are treated differently, or sons and daughters are treated differently. And so, if we want to be on the right side of this issue, we have to be willing to open our minds and say, look, what we were raised on, like the culture that we were raised in, it may have provided us with a lot of opportunity and benefits, but we have to understand that there were wrong parts of it, and there are wrong parts of it. And if we open our minds to that change and say, look, as we grow up and have families of our own, we have to make sure to be the ones to equalize those partnerships, as they just said, to make sure that we don't bring with us the oppression or discrimination that was held in our culture for so long, that was rooted in how our grandparents or maybe even our parents were raised and grew up. And so, wanting to be on that right side is something that everyone wants to be at, but a lot of people struggle with the opening and changing their minds in that. So I think if we were to kind of sum up that message, it's just, keep your mind open, understand that things have been wrong in the past, but they don't have to always stay wrong just because they were before.
Right. I just have to say that, I know that there's a lot of work, even within women in South Asian communities, that we have to do a lot of unlearning too. Misogyny doesn't only exist as perpetuated by men, but it's always I don't know, it feels momentous to me to see young South Asian men taking the lead in conversations around sexual violence prevention. I mean, that is really something that we need. And y'all talk so eloquently about it, kind of makes me emotional because I believe in that things can change. So thank you for all the work that you've been doing. And thank you for taking the time to have this conversation with me.